Hello people and welcome back to another video. I just want to highlight this video by the Brit-am movement. And the Brit-am movement are a bunch of Jewish guys and they live in Israel and they believe that the lost tribes are in the Western countries, including Britain, France, even America. This guy here believes that the Jews are Judah and the Western countries are Joseph. He refers to him as Ephraim. So if you hear him saying Ephraim, it's the same as Joseph, and which means Britain and the Americans. So their theories are very interesting. It's the same when I look at this kind of stuff, the lost tribes. But I've got a kind of opposite theory from them. They think that the Exodus happened and the tribes went into European countries, where I think the tribes began in Western Europe and spread through to Turkey and the Middle East that way. So I'm thinking it's going the opposite way. And I'm not really thinking, because these people believe that the Jews are a race and they believe all the biblical stuff literally, practically literally. And I don't believe it so literally as these people. But they're still on the same lines as the lost tribes being in European countries. And Commons Beaumont said the same thing, and this is why the Bible's a British book, because even the Jews end up, the ones that study it properly end up leading to Britain somehow. Anyway, this is Rabbi Avraham Feld, and he says some interesting stuff about the Ephraim or Joseph, who are Britain and America in their eyes, and they think Judah are the Jews.
And this purpose of this little conversation we're having is to improve the relationship and advancing peace, reconciliation, reunion, as per the main theme of biblical prophecy. Here are a few examples of this mysterious interplay between Ten Israel and Judah. The role of Ten Israel, Ephraim, Joseph, as a guardian angel of Judah was invisible to Judah. Judah should rejoice in the words of the song, "You are my special angel for eternity. You are my special angel sent to watch over me."
So what he's saying is that the West, Joseph, or Ephraim as he calls them, have been the guardians of the Jews, their peoples, for this long, and the Jews haven't even realised it, and he's trying to emphasise it through this song anyway.
Many of our experts in Israel have long ago refuted the left-wing mantra that there could be no military solution to radicalized Arab-Israeli conflict. For example, the man labeled Israel's greatest soldier, second to our Prime Minister, former Chief of Staff Moshe Ayalon, Boogie, has repeatedly said that within 12 to 72 hours, all enemy entities, Hamas and Fatah, can be destroyed. This would bring the atmosphere back to the way it was right after the Six-Day War, when Arabs had a certain respect for Jews. It would also free the Arabs from the terror despotic forces that presently rule them. General Yaakov Amidar, recent past head of National Security Council, expressed a similar position and said, "In the end, we will have to completely reconquer Gaza." Minister and key player in several coalitions, Professor Yuval Steinitz has said a two-state solution will bring about the demise of Israel. I personally have always said concerning all kinds of wars that a truce, hudna, hafsakadesh, often doesn't work. But the unconditional surrender and re-education of the enemy always seems to do the trick. All of the above bravo and extreme military power, which allow the above experts to speak so confidently, exist 100% because of the power, finances, weapon systems, and backup by the Ephraimite countries.
So what he's saying is the Jews are so confident because they're backed up 100% by the West, by Britain and America. And the Jews seem to forget that. They take that for granted. And he's trying to highlight this. That if it wasn't for the West, the Jews wouldn't even exist. Israel as a country wouldn't even exist.
The reality of this statement should be a sobering consideration for many Israelis today. To those who may well dispute and reject this statement, I will ask, who gave this country to us? Who organized international conferences which seeded this area for the, quote, for the establishment of the Jewish national homeland? Who fought the wars that drove out the mighty established empire, the Ottoman Turk, to eventually create the Jewish state? I would ask, who assumed that Israel would be a member of the great British Commonwealth of Nations? Who instated a currency internationally acceptable with Hebrew letterings, including letters in Hebrew representing the land of Israel after 2,000 years with no semblance of freedom and independence? Finally, a Hebrew coin and valid currency. All of this done for the purposes of up-and-coming independent state in brief sovereignty. 3 American presidents and international understandings of only 10 Israel-identified countries believe that transfer of the local Arab populations would be the most logical, humanistic, and just solution to avoid future problems. You know, they'll be like radical Islam, and they'll turn these Arabs into enemies. And so the best thing is for peace is population transfers. Something that the leaders of Judah and the land do not dare to suggest. Judah needed 10 Israel to realize its destiny. Don't you agree? We couldn't have had proper Jewish Zionism without Ephraimite Zionism.
So Ephraimite Zionism is Christian Zionism. So he's saying that you couldn't have Jewish Zionism without Christian Zionism. And that comes with the King James Bible and the divine right to rule. This idea that divine right when you're God's chosen people.
Do your homework, you'll see it's true. The answer to all these questions is those countries which we know today identified as having Ephraimite roots, and they are the very countries mentioned by the Abarbanel, Rashi, Ramban, Radak, Targum Yonatan, Medrash Tanchuma, Das Genim, and prophets. These are the very countries that the great Yair Davidi has researched their background and proven they are where the tribal countries are in Western Europeans. These are the countries that helped us come out of our exile state. By the way, these are the same countries that just spent $2 trillion and lost 4,500 men fighting for us against ferocious enemies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yitzhak Rabin said, it's unbelievable. It's from God. Other people are fighting our battles. Radical jihadist Islam leadership has stated numerous times that their first and prime objective is to rid the world first and foremost of Israel. You see, in their minds, Israel actually occupies and is the land that once upon a nightmare, was controlled by Muslims, and must be the first areas liberated from the non-Muslims. USA just gave it a few years back, just gave an additional $436 million for our Arrow missile system. Ephraim money with Judah high-tech, thus fulfilling the prophet Zechariah's words that Judah is the bow and Ephraim is the arrow.
So this is what he's saying, that we're actually a team. Judah's the bow and Ephraim's the arrow.
Enemies see this so clearly. Our enemies see all of this clearly. Why don't we see it? We're called the Great Satan, and America's called the Great Satan. You know, the First World War was basically waged against Ephraimite nations. And if it wasn't for America bringing many, many tons of food, supplies, and medicine, our settlement in Israel would have been destroyed. If you remember, America in the beginning was neutral. So the Turkish allowed them access to the Jews of Palestine. Every step of our way towards redemption has been assisted to us in the nitty-gritty by Ephraimite nations. The Second World War was also fought against Ephraimite nations. The Nazis saw Britain as basically of latent Hebrew roots and had a plan to get rid of all the males after victory was secured. Radical Arabs and jihadists believed that the West, those countries we identified as from the 10 tribes, especially the U.S., are with Israel, little Satan, big Satan dynamic. If our enemies can see all this, why can't we? We Jews take for granted that this state was given to us. Why should we? In all of history, there is no reason or basis for taking these phenomena for granted. We act as if it's obvious that people should give us a state. Surely there must be more behind this than meets the eye. The facts of history testify against this notion of just giving and just receiving national territory when it comes to Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. A few examples why we should not take this gift from Ephraimite nations for granted. Roman pagan rule was
See, Israel was a gift that they shouldn't take for granted. So they think.
Anti-one God, anti-Torah, and anti-any hint of independence of true Jewish freedom. 500 years of Byzantine rule where Jews officially weren't even allowed in Jerusalem. Remember, Canaanites, Egyptians, Chaldeans, Medians, Assyrians, Babylonians, their rule equaled our subjugation in various degrees of tolerance and hell. Greek Hellenist rule yielded oppression, assimilation, and death. The Roman Byzantine domination over the Promised Land, it never occurred to these rulers that the Jews should have anything at all in this land. This rule was based in Asa. The Christian conquest of the Holy Land was generated and overseen by Rome, by Asa, only resulted in our humiliation, rape, oppression, and death. A host of Muslim rulers had a common denominator of zero political freedom for Jews and subjugated Judaism. Even Salah ad-Din, who fought shoulder to shoulder with brave Jews, whom he personally respected, never thought to give the Jews any kind of statehood. Muslim and Jewish blood ran together as they battled against the Rome-driven Christians. Yet this friendship would never produce a free Jewish entity. The Ottoman Turks ruled the land for 400 years. They were a mixture of Ishmael, non-Ephraimite nations, and likewise, there was never any intention to give anything to the Jews. The underlying difference was when England stepped in. England, an Ephraimite nation, everything changed. And I want to go further. Even when 10 Israel, Ephraim officially lost battle here and there, it still comes out in some crucial way, in a mysterious, mystical way, as an indirect victory for surviving, identifiable Judah, and moves us all a step closer to a reunion. In their spilt blood, on distant battlefields, Ephraim helped establish Judah securely in our ancient land.
The guy's nearly shedding a tear for the fact that Ephraim shed blood for them. Look at that. You seen that? That looked genuine.
This interdependence between Ephraim and Judah is truly a great mystery and a wondrous directional proof of Hashem's working, of God's working. God is weaving through the dynamics of history a tapestry of Messianism, a tapestry of redemption, hidden in plain sight. Let us learn together, again learning, a few examples from what I just said, from a few minutes ago. Just a few examples. The British in World War II were under terrible pressure from dark forces within and from dark forces without to kill the Jews. These forces of non-Yosef Ephraimite nations such as Amalek, Asa, etc. But they resisted it a lot. They stood up against it a lot. The pressure on England from outside consisted for example, of the new oil-producing Arab Muslims with their petrodollars available for investments. These pro-Nazi Arab forces threatened to actively join the Nazi cause. Even the pure Ephraimites could be bad to Judah under negative external corrupting influence. There are things that we could say that England should have done differently. But even, this is what's amazing, even the British negativity solved a terrible problem seldom spoken of even today, that was slowly killing the spirit of return to the land. You see, many of the Yishuv, of the settlement leadership, were against the declaration of state of Israel, even after the League of Nations had given permission for an Israeli state. Right, they created all these Arab states, and they cut up the Ottoman Turk Empire, and they were going to give 1% to the Jewish people. This is after the Balfour Declaration, after the Anglican understandings, the San Remo Conference, after international law had agreed to give the Jews a British mandate to establish their own country. Even some great Muslim clerics even gave legal decisions in support of a national Jewish state on all the British mandate, which was only 1% of the former Ottoman Empire. This was several years before oil started to flow into the coffers of radical Muslim fanatics. 22 Arab states were carved out of the fallen Turkish Empire, several of which would be occupying biblical Israel. Yet despite this international atmosphere endorsing a Jewish state, the settlement bosses like the great Dr. Chaim Weizmann wanted to wait for more infrastructure to develop, more roads, more bridges. Let the British build more. Nor did the ultra-Orthodox, nor did the modern or religious Zionist leaders declare a state. What happened to change all this? What happened to make everyone decide that we could no longer hang on to the apron strings of other peoples? And we could no longer let others be the custodians of the land? Remember, Ben-Gurion was likewise under pressure from extreme left side of his party to wait as well. The powerful intellectual left elite of Hebrew University also opposed any statehood. They felt nationalism would be an unnecessary excursion away from humanism, pluralism, and universalism. Many others were against the statehood for a legitimate concern that the Arabs would overrun us with a successful, devastating pogrom. Hence, it was better to remain under British rule permanently. So what happened? The British happened. Ephraim happened. Since it's not a doctorate, we're not going to go in many more examples. But I will say, besides Dr. Weizmann, he wanted more. There was many people besides him that wanted more infrastructure with the British help and thought autonomy would be enough. Golda Meir, Mabovich, Bat Bluma, Bat Moshe Yitzhak, and others have wondered just how and why the British, and I quote her, stood with so much courage and determination against the Nazis, also found the energy and resources to fight a war against the admittance of Jewish refugees to Israel. All I know is that the state of Israel might not have come into being for many years if that British war within a war had not been waged so ferociously and with such insane persistence. The leadership of the Jewish presence here, the Yishuv we call it, knew the English were under pressure from the Arabs, but since it was a matter of life and death, the Brits could have told the Arabs that the white paper will have to wait until after the hostilities, at which time we could also expel those Jews out of Palestine. Golda Meir continues in her book that it was only when the British government decided, in the face of reason, to place itself like an iron war between us and whatever chance we had of rescuing Jews from the Nazis. We realized political independence was not something that we could go on regarding as a distant aim. The need to control in order to save lives pushed them into making the sort of decision quote, which might otherwise have waited for much better, if not ideal conditions. Do you understand what I'm saying? That the Jews themselves said, okay, Nishkafela, we'll have the British over us. And it'll even be better conditions. But little did they know, conditions were going to get much worse. The UN of 1948 was going to become more and more anti-Israel, and the conditions would become impossible. So who saved us from this mistake? Even the negativity of an Ephraimite country saved Judah. The Jewish settlement leadership did not know that oil and its revenue would dominate country after country, which would in turn fall under Arab influence. Thus, time was not on their side. There was only a small window of opportunity to utilize. The need to save lives became the most urgent and pressing need the Yishuv had known. The right of the Yishuv to govern itself became crucial. And it, quote, Golda Meir and many others who thought like that, and it was out of the depths of this need, essentially, that the state of Israel was founded only 3 years after the end of the war. She continues voicing the opinion of many. The Yishuv had not asked for any power or privileges of any kind. They just begged, in view of the death sentence passed on the Jews of Europe, to be allowed to share whatever we had with them. It was the British who succeeded in teaching a simple lesson never to be forgotten, namely that the people other than ourselves, Judah, could, quote, not feel the agonies as felt them or put the same value in Jewish lives as we did. We could not feel our agonies as we felt them, other people, or put the same value in Jewish lives as we did. Thus, even when an Ephraimite country is controlled in part by some non-Ephraimite, anti-Ephraimites people, still, Afal Pikain, Hashem works it out to still benefit Judah by their association. Now, for example, of how even an Ephraimite apparent defeat in the past helped to protect and save Judah in the future.
Anyway, guys, really interesting video. And the guy just goes on and on how Americans are British. Kinda, if it wasn't for them, there'd be no such thing as Israel or even Jews, in fact. So, anyway, hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you in my next video. Cheers.